Jake Morrison was under a 2005 Honda Civic when she walked into the shop. Victoria Ashford, 32 years old, heiress to a $200 million real estate empire, drove a flame-red Ferrari 488 GTB worth more than everything Jake had earned in 10 years of work. She pulled up right in front of his workbench with a roar that rattled the tools hanging on the wall. When she stepped out of the car in Louboutin heels and a tailored suit that cost as much as Jake's monthly rent, she looked down at him with a smile that mixed charm and contempt. The Ferrari was leaking oil from the engine. He noticed it immediately. A damaged oil pan gasket, probably from reckless speed on a rough road. She tossed the keys onto his workbench casually and spoke the words that would change both their lives. "If you fix my Ferrari in 10 minutes, I'll give you a chance to take me out. Otherwise, get back under your Honda and tell me what I owe you." The smile was a challenge, her eyes gleaming with that arrogant confidence that only money can buy. But what Victoria didn't know was that Jake Morrison wasn't just any mechanic, and the chance she was offering with such condescension was about to become the most expensive lesson she'd ever received. Morrison Auto Repair sat in Queens, New York, wedged between an abandoned warehouse and a bodega run by a Dominican family. It wasn't the kind of place where a Ferrari 488 GTB normally stopped. The cars that rolled in were old Hondas, worn-out Toyotas, maybe a Volkswagen with recurring issues. Jake Morrison was 34 and had run the shop alone since his father died 5 years ago. It was small but clean, with tools organized like museum pieces, the floor always washed, tire calendars hanging on the walls. Jake was tall with broad shoulders from years of physical work, dark hair always slightly messy, and hands permanently stained with grease despite daily showers. That Thursday afternoon in May, he was working on Mrs. Chen's Honda Civic, a neighborhood regular who'd been coming to him for 20 years. The car had starter motor problems, simple work, but requiring patience. Jake loved these jobs. There was something meditative about solving mechanical problems, making broken things work again. The Ferrari's roar was like thunder on a clear day. Jake slid out from under the Civic, wiping his hands with a rag, and saw the red car stop right at the shop entrance. For a moment, he thought she was lost. These kinds of cars never got lost in this part of Queens. Then she got out. Victoria Ashford was the type of woman you saw on magazine covers, not in a Queens auto shop. Tall, perfectly styled brown hair, an electric blue suit that looked painted on her body, sky-high heels. But it was the look that struck most. Confident, almost dismissive, as if the world were a stage built for her amusement. She looked around with an expression that clearly said what she thought of the place. Jake saw her eyes scan the old Civic, the tools on the wall, the faded posters of classic engines. Then her gaze landed on him, and for a second, Jake saw that typical evaluation rich people make. What are you worth? Are you somebody or nobody? Victoria tossed the Ferrari keys onto the workbench with a theatrical gesture. The challenge came in words that mixed seduction and condescension in equal parts. 10 minutes to fix the Ferrari, and he'd get a chance to go out with her. Otherwise, he could go back under his Honda like a poor Queens mechanic. Jake looked at her in silence for a long moment. He noticed everything in that split second. The oil dripping from the Ferrari, forming a small puddle on the shop floor. The damaged oil pan gasket, probably from impact. The way she leaned against the car, sure he'd accept the challenge, that he'd humiliate himself to please her. And he did something Victoria Ashford didn't expect. He smiled. Not a servile or intimidated smile. A calm, almost amused smile. Then he turned and went back under the Civic, without saying a word, without picking up the keys, without even looking at her again. The silence that followed was so thick you could cut it. Victoria stood motionless, as if unable to process what had just happened. Nobody ever said no to her. Nobody ever ignored her request, and certainly no Queens mechanic dared turn his back on her. After what seemed like an eternity, her voice cut through the silence, higher, less confident. Jake responded from his position under the Civic, without even seeing her. His voice was calm, almost kind, but firm. He explained that the shop wasn't a circus, and he wasn't a monkey doing tricks for entertainment. If she needed the repair, he'd repair it. If she wanted to humiliate someone to feel powerful, she could try somewhere else. The silence that followed was even deeper. Jake heard her heels approach, stop, then move away. But not toward the Ferrari. Toward him. When Victoria's voice returned, it was completely different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something more complex. Surprise, maybe a hint of respect, and something that almost resembled curiosity. Jake slid out from under the Civic, stood up, and for the first time, really looked her in the eyes. She was beautiful, yes, but behind that beauty and confidence, he saw something he recognized: loneliness. The kind of loneliness that comes when you're surrounded by people who always say yes. He explained he hadn't rejected her. He'd rejected how she'd treated him. There was a difference. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. For the first time in years, she didn't know what to say. Jake returned to his work under the Civic. After a minute, he heard her footsteps again. This time, they stopped right next to him. She apologized, admitting she'd gone too far, and asked if he could look at the Ferrari, paying the normal rate. Jake came out again, wiped his hands, and nodded. He'd finish with the Civic first, then look at her Ferrari. 20 minutes for the Civic. Victoria protested about an important appointment, but Jake was unmoved. He worked in order of arrival, and Mrs. Chen had been there first. Victoria stared at him as if he'd spoken an alien language. Then, incredibly, she laughed. A real laugh, not the fake salon laugh she used at charity events. She sat down on a plastic chair in the corner of the shop, amid the smell of oil and burnt rubber, in her $2,000 suit, and waited. Victoria Ashford didn't remember the last time she'd waited for anything or anyone. In her life, things happened immediately. You called, you ordered, you got. Restaurants that didn't take reservations miraculously found her a table. Sold-out events reserved the best seats for her. Waiting was for other people, for normal people. Yet there she was, sitting on a plastic chair in a Queens auto shop, watching a mechanic work under a 2005 Honda Civic as if it were the most important thing in the world. Jake worked with almost Zen concentration. His hands moved with millimetric precision between cables, bolts, components. Occasionally, he talked to himself quietly, a technical monologue that sounded like a prayer. Victoria took out her phone to check Instagram, then put it away. There was something hypnotic about watching him work. No rush, no anxiety, just competence and patience. After exactly 19 minutes, Jake slid out from under the Civic and started the engine. The sound was perfect. He called Mrs. Chen, explained what he'd done with a kindness that surprised Victoria, and refused to charge more than $60. Mrs. Chen protested that he'd worked for almost an hour, but Jake insisted. She'd been coming since he was a kid. Trust had no price. When Mrs. Chen left with her perfectly functioning Civic, Jake finally turned to the Ferrari. He approached with respect, as if examining a work of art. His hands ran over the bodywork. Then he knelt to look underneath. After 30 seconds, he diagnosed the problem. Damaged oil pan gasket. The job was simple, but took 3 hours because he had to order the original part. If he used a generic one, he'd fix it in an hour, but it would last half as long and could cause engine problems. Victoria protested about the time, but Jake was clear. He could call her a taxi, and she'd come back when the part arrived. Or she could use the Ferrari and risk seriously damaging the engine. Then he asked a question that hit Victoria like a slap. Hadn't her father ever taught her that some things can't be bought quickly? The mention of her father, Robert Ashford, dead 3 years ago from a sudden heart attack, hit her hard. He hadn't taught her anything, really, except to sign checks and associate with the right people. Jake looked at her with an indecipherable expression and said simply that he was sorry for her. Not sorry for your loss, but sorry for you. As if he understood something Victoria herself didn't want to admit. Victoria's phone rang. It was her personal assistant, reminding her of the board meeting in an hour. An important meeting involving millions of dollars. Victoria looked at the phone, then the Ferrari, then Jake. She made a decision that surprised even herself. She canceled the meeting, told Jake to order the part, and said she'd wait. In the following hours, Victoria stayed there, watching Jake work on other cars. She began to notice things. How he talked with each customer. Not like a mechanic listing technical problems to justify a hefty bill, but like someone who genuinely wanted to help. How he treated cars. Even a broke college student's Polo received the same attention as the Ferrari. When the part arrived and Jake started working on the Ferrari, Victoria approached and asked if she could watch. Jake smiled and said it was her car. And so Victoria Ashford, heiress to a $200 million empire, found herself kneeling on the cement floor, watching a mechanic replace a gasket. Jake explained each step with a simplicity that made everything clear. He talked about how the gasket was like a promise between two parts, how the Ferrari was powerful but also delicate, how beautiful things in life required respect. The words resonated inside Victoria in a way she didn't expect. When was the last time someone had talked to her about respect? About delicacy? When Jake finished, 2 hours had passed. The engine purred perfectly. He asked for $200 for the part and labor. Victoria laughed. She knew what they'd charge at an authorized Ferrari shop. But Jake explained he charged what the work was worth, not what her car was worth. Victoria looked him in the eyes and asked a question she didn't expect to ask. Why had he said no before? Most men would have accepted that chance immediately. Jake wiped his hands and thought for a moment. Then he explained he didn't want to be a bet, a momentary toy, the funny story to tell rich friends. If he went out with someone, it should be because she wanted to know him, not for a quick repair. The words hit Victoria with brutal force. Nobody had ever talked to her like that, with that honesty and quiet dignity. She found herself asking what would happen if she really wanted to know him. Jake smiled and proposed she pick him up the next evening for dinner. A normal place, real pizza, conversation. No Ferrari, no money, no rolls. But there was a condition. She had to come to his address, see how a Queen's mechanic lived, then decide if she still wanted that evening. Victoria nodded, paid the $200, and drove away. But as she crossed New York toward her penthouse, she realized that for the first time in years, she was looking forward to something. Not a contract, not an event, a pizza, with a mechanic who'd treated her like a person. Victoria spent 24 hours in a state of nervousness she didn't remember. She spent an hour in front of her closet, trying to figure out what to wear. Finally, she chose real jeans, a simple white shirt, sneakers. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. Jake's address in Astoria, Queens, was in an area she'd driven through but never really seen. 1970s buildings, kids playing in the street. His apartment was small but meticulously organized. Shelves of books, worn couch, photos on the walls of him with an older man and him as a kid already covered in grease.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Guido's Pizza was the kind of place she would have ignored. Small, formica tables, menu on a chalkboard. The owner hugged Jake like a brother. Victoria felt like an alien. Guido interrogated her with direct questions. When he discovered she built luxury housing, he raised an eyebrow. The margarita pizza arrived simple but perfect. Jake talked about how Guido made pizza for passion, not critics. Victoria saw a passion rare in her world. Then he asked the devastating question, did she love what she did? Victoria had no answer. It was inherited responsibility, not love. She told him about selling historic buildings for luxury residences. Jake asked how she felt. Not the company, her. Empty, she admitted. She described the historic shops, the evicted families. He asked where they go. She didn't know. Her lawyer handled the details. Jake's silence said everything. When they finished, they walked to the Ferrari. Victoria thanked him for showing her that different world. Before she left, Jake made a final observation. Maybe it was worth asking if the money she earned was worth the stories she destroyed. And he walked away, leaving Victoria with questions that rang like bells. Victoria spent the next day at the office with her mind elsewhere. During a meeting about a new development that would replace an old cinema, she found herself asking unprecedented questions. Where will the people go? Where will the evicted families live? Her CFO looked puzzled. It wasn't their responsibility, but Victoria insisted. She wanted to know, wanted alternatives, wanted to ensure nobody ended up homeless. The silence in the room was thick. Her employees looked at her like she was crazy. When the meeting ended, Victoria stood alone looking at New York from the 20th floor. For the first time, she wondered how many lives were living down there while she decided their fate from this tower. The phone rang. It was Jake. He'd finished early. He wanted to show her more of New York. Victoria left everything and arrived in 20 minutes. Jake took her to unknown places, markets with shouting vendors, a community theater with amateur actors, an independent bookstore run by septuagenarians. As they walked along the waterfront, Jake explained he'd grown up in a world where, if something breaks, you don't throw it out, you fix it. Where life is made of relationships, not transactions. He talked about his father, dead from lung cancer 5 years ago. He remembered how he treated every customer like family, how he fixed cars for people who couldn't pay much, how he taught that work was dignity. Then he asked the devastating question. Looking back, did Victoria want to see money or lives positively touched? That evening, on a hill overlooking New York, Victoria asked why he wasn't married. Jake told her about Elena, his girlfriend of 10 years who'd chosen Dubai. He couldn't leave the shop, his father's memory. For her, it was just a shop. She'd left him. Then it was Victoria's turn. Many relationships, but none real. Men who wanted money, her name, status. Jake said simply that she was lonely. When you're lonely long enough, you build walls so high you don't even remember why. Victoria admitted she didn't know how to live normally, how to love, how to be happy without controlling everything. Jake took her hand and said she could learn, one day at a time, and he could teach her. Victoria understood something terrifying and wonderful. She was falling in love, not with the romantic idea, but with the real Jake, the man who saw through her defenses and challenged her to be better. The following weeks were the strangest and most beautiful of Victoria's life. She divided time between two worlds. By day, her empire's meetings, by evening, and weekends, pizzerias, and markets with Jake through an unknown New York. But the two worlds were colliding. Her board noticed the changes. Victoria asked uncomfortable questions, delayed approvals, insisted on social impact assessments. Profits were high, but aggressive growth was slowing. Investors were getting nervous about this new sensitivity affecting operations. That's when the offer came. A Chinese real estate giant wanted to acquire the entire Ashford company. $500 million. Victoria would stay rich, freed from responsibility. But free to do what? That evening she told Jake everything in his small kitchen. Victoria spent more and more time there, in the two-room apartment that felt more like home than her 4,000-square-foot penthouse. Jake was chopping vegetables for simple pasta while listening. He said the real question wasn't how much money, but what she wanted to do with her life. Victoria admitted she didn't know. For the first time in 30 years, she didn't know. Jake said it was okay not to know. Not in her world, Victoria protested. In her world, uncertainty was weakness. Jake put down the knife and asked a question. If she had 1 year to live, what would she do? Victoria thought. A month ago, she would have said close more deals. But now, she wanted to really live. Learn to cook, travel for pleasure, and spend time with him. Jake smiled. Maybe she had her answer. But Victoria protested about responsibilities, people who depended on the company. Jake didn't say abandon. He said choose, and any choice had to be hers. Not her dead father's, not investors, not expectations. Hers. That night, Victoria lay awake in her giant bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about her father, Robert, dead at 62 without ever seeing a sunset, without thinking about contracts, who never knew grandchildren because she never had time for a real family. The next morning, she called an emergency board meeting. She announced the $500 million offer, seeing their expressions light up. Then she said she was refusing. Expressions changed from excited to shocked. Instead, she proposed complete restructuring. She'd keep control, but distribute shares to employees. Change the business model, less aggressive acquisitions, more sustainable renovations. Every project with positive social impact, and she'd reduce her salary by 70%. The silence was absolute. 3 board members resigned immediately. The others stayed, some from conviction, others from curiosity, others for the shares they'd receive. That evening, Victoria went to the shop straight from the meeting, still in her suit. She told Jake everything. He listened in silence, wiping his hands. He asked if she was sure. She said no. She was terrified. But it was the first thing in years that felt right, instead of just profitable. Jake took her in his arms, her in heels and expensive suit, him in stained coveralls, and said 4 words worth more than all the millions she'd ever earned. He was proud of her. 6 months later, New York was experiencing a transformation. Ashford Development had launched Livable NYC, renovation instead of demolition, affordable housing included in every development, historic shop preservation. Not all investors were happy. Profits grew only 10% instead of the projected 30%. But people were starting to talk about Ashford Development as a model of responsible development. Victoria was still in meetings almost as much as before, but they were different. She met shopkeepers, talked with preservation architects, listened, learned, and every evening she returned to the Astoria apartment, because now she lived there. She'd transformed the penthouse into a shelter for single mothers in difficulty. One evening, a call came from San Francisco. A major group wanted to invest massively in Ashford Development, attracted by the new model. Not an acquisition, but a partnership. $100 million to expand Livable NYC across America. Victoria explained to Jake it was a dream. She could do nationally what she was doing in New York, Boston, Chicago, LA, but it meant constant travel, less time with him. Jake said she couldn't sacrifice her dreams for him. She protested that he was part of her dreams now, the most important part. Jake explained calmly that if she refused and then resented him in 5 years, he didn't want to be the reason she didn't reach her potential. Victoria said she didn't know how to balance love with ambition. Jake smiled. Maybe because now ambition was for something bigger. People who truly love support each other, don't obstruct. He said she should accept the investment, expand the project, change America. He'd be in Queens fixing cars and waiting for her. Weekends they'd see each other. It would be hard, but real. And if distance separated them, at least they'd tried. Because if she gave up who she was from fear of losing him, she'd lose him anyway. True love doesn't ask those sacrifices. Victoria looked at this man with calloused hands and enormous heart and understood why she loved him. He really saw her. He wanted her happy more than he wanted to keep her. She said the first true words of love she'd spoken in her life. Jake answered that he loved her too, and that's why he was letting her fly. 2 years later, Ashford Development had become a case study in business schools. Livable America, was active in 8 cities. Victoria appeared on magazines not as a frivolous heiress, but as an ethical business visionary. And every Friday evening she returned to the Astoria apartment, where Jake waited with pasta and a smile. It wasn't perfect. There were fights about distance, lonely nights, moments of frustration, but it was real. Love built on the daily choice to choose each other. One evening, Victoria came home to find the apartment full of cheap supermarket candles. Jake was kneeling in the middle of the living room. He said he had a prepared speech, not elegant, but honest. He told her that 3 years ago she'd walked into his shop with a broken Ferrari and a condescending offer, and he was sure she was just another spoiled rich person. He was right. She was. But she'd done something extraordinary. She'd chosen to change. Not for him, but for herself. She'd become the bravest and best person he knew. He pulled out a simple blue velvet box. The ring had belonged to his grandmother. It wasn't worth anything on the market, maybe $500. But for him it was worth everything, because it represented 60 years of marriage based not on money, but on true love. He wanted her to have it. If she'd marry a mechanic who could never give her Ferraris or penthouses, but pasta and honest love for the rest of her life. Victoria was crying now, tears flowing without shame. She looked at the simple ring with the small diamond and saw 3 generations of love. She said yes. The wedding was 6 months later at Guido's Pizza, not in a luxury venue, but with formica tables pushed together, party lights, pizza better than any expensive catering. Victoria wore a simple white dress. Jake a modest but clean suit. The guests were an impossible mix. Board members next to mechanics. Wealthy clients next to Mrs. Chen. When Guido asked if there were objections, nobody spoke. Everyone saw something rare. True love. In her speech, Victoria said something that would be quoted for years. 3 years ago, she thought success was measured in millions. Today, she knew it was measured in moments. Moments of honesty, connection, choosing to be better. And every moment with Jake had made her richer than all the money in the world could. That night, in the 2-room apartment with cheap furniture and a wedding that would never appear in glossy magazines, Victoria Morrison realized she'd finally found something no amount of money could buy. Home. Not a physical place, but a sense of belonging. A place where she could remove all masks and simply be herself. And in that simplicity, she found something she'd searched for all her life without knowing. Peace. Like if you believe true love can't be bought with money. Comment. If you've ever learned an important lesson from someone unexpected, share this story of humbled pride and authentic love found. Subscribe for more stories, proving the most precious things are priceless. Sometimes the richest person in the room is the one with grease-stained hands and a heart full of dignity. And sometimes true love begins not when someone says yes to your money, but when they say no to your arrogance.